Silas Thorne had lived alone in the old wooden house on the edge of the frozen lake for 3 winters, and he'd come to believe the silence was a companion, not a curse. The wind howled through the pines like a chorus of ghosts, and the snow piled high against the windows, turning his world into a small, warm pocket of solitude. He was a man who preferred the company of his own thoughts and the steady rhythm of chopping wood to the unpredictable chaos of other people. That's why, when he opened his front door one evening to fetch another log from the stacked pile under the porch, the sight that greeted him stopped his heart cold. There, huddled in the lee of the house, half buried in the fresh powder, were 3 figures. 2 small ones, no bigger than his knee, were wrapped in a threadbare, silvery blanket, their faces hidden. Between them stood a woman, her skin a deep, regal violet that seemed to absorb the fading twilight, her long hair the color of fresh snow. She was tall and lean, her posture rigid with exhaustion and defiance, her large, almond-shaped eyes fixed on him with a mixture of fear and desperate hope. She held a crude spear fashioned from scrap metal, its point trembling slightly as she aimed it at his chest. Silas didn't move. He just stared, his mind struggling to reconcile the impossible with the undeniable reality before him. They were humanoid, yes, but their features were subtly alien. The high cheekbones, the slight points of their ears, the way their eyes seemed to glow faintly in the gloom. The woman's clothes were strange, woven from a material that shimmered like oil on water, now torn and stained with grime and what looked like dried blood. Her name, he would later learn, was Lyra, and the 2 children clinging to her legs were her twins, Kaelin and Mira. They were refugees, survivors of a war that had scorched their home world to ash, their ship a smoldering wreck somewhere in the mountains to the north. They had walked for weeks through the brutal winter, guided by a failing homing beacon that had led them not to safety, but to his lonely cabin. For a long moment, the only sound was the wind and the soft whimper of one of the children. Silas saw the tremor in Lyra's hand, not from the cold, but from the sheer effort of holding herself upright. He saw the hollows beneath her eyes, the desperate plea she couldn't voice. Slowly, deliberately, he set the axe he'd been holding down on the porch step. He didn't speak, just turned and walked back inside, leaving the door wide open. It was an invitation, fragile and wordless, offered not out of kindness, but out of a simple, human inability to watch another being freeze to death on his doorstep. The next few hours were a blur of awkward, silent activity. Lyra, after a moment of stunned hesitation, ushered her children inside with a gentle but firm hand. They moved with a quiet grace that belied their obvious terror, their large, violet eyes taking in every detail of the warm, cluttered room with a mixture of wonder and suspicion. Silas busied himself at the stove, heating a pot of thick stew he'd made the day before. He didn't look at them directly, giving them space to acclimate to the warmth, to the smell of food, to the simple, overwhelming fact of safety. He placed 3 bowls on the rough-hewn table and gestured for them to eat. Lyra watched him for a long time before finally nodding to her children. They ate with a speed and intensity that spoke of profound hunger, their small hands clutching the spoons like lifelines. Lyra ate more slowly, her eyes never leaving Silas, studying him as if trying to decipher a complex puzzle. He learned their names through gestures and broken, guttural sounds from their language, which he slowly began to understand was a mix of clicks and soft vowels. In return, he pointed to himself and said, "Silas." The name seemed to intrigue her. She repeated it, her voice a low, melodic hum that sent an unexpected shiver down his spine. That first night, they slept on the floor by the fire, Lyra positioned between her children and the door, her spear still within easy reach. Silas lay in his bed, listening to their soft, alien breathing, his solitary world irrevocably shattered. Life in the cabin changed overnight. The silence was gone, replaced by the soft chatter of the twins, the clink of dishes, and Lyra's quiet, observant presence. She was fiercely protective, her initial wariness melting only in small, cautious increments. She watched Silas chop wood, mend his fishing nets, and tend to the small vegetable patch he kept under a glass roof. She began to help, her movements efficient and strong. She showed him how to weave a stronger net from local reeds, her long, slender fingers working with a dexterity that was almost magical. She could track an animal through the deepest snow by reading the subtlest disturbances in the wind. In turn, Silas taught her how to use his tools, how to start a fire with flint and steel, how to identify the edible plants that grew near the frozen lake. A strange, unspoken understanding grew between them, a bridge built of shared chores and mutual respect. The twins, Kaelin and Mira, were quick to adapt. They followed Silas around like tiny shadows, their initial fear replaced by a boundless curiosity. They laughed at his clumsy attempts to pronounce their names, their giggles echoing in the old wooden beams. They loved the stories he told them by the fire, simple tales of Earth, of heroes and monsters, of faraway places that seemed as fantastical to them as their own world did to him. Their laughter was a balm to Silas's long-held loneliness, a warmth that seeped into his bones deeper than any fire ever could. One afternoon, while Silas was repairing a hole in the roof, a sudden, sharp cry from below made him scramble down the ladder. He found Lyra standing over Kalen, who had cut his hand badly on a piece of broken glass from an old jar. The boy was crying, great, heaving sobs of pain and fear. Lyra's face was a mask of panic, her white hair falling across her violet skin as she tried to staunch the bleeding with a cloth. She looked up at Silas, her eyes wide with a terror he hadn't seen before. Not the fear of an enemy, but the primal fear of a mother for her child. Without a word, Silas took over. He cleaned the wound with melted snow, applied a salve he'd made from pine resin and herbs, and bandaged it tightly. As he worked, Lyra watched his hands, her breathing slowly calming. When he was finished, she didn't thank him in words. Instead, she reached out and gently touched his forearm, her fingers cool against his skin. It was a simple gesture, but it carried the weight of 1,000 unspoken words of gratitude. In that moment, the last wall between them seemed to crumble. She saw not just a stranger who had given them shelter, but a man of quiet competence and deep, unassuming kindness. He saw not just an alien refugee, but a mother whose love for her children was as fierce and bright as any star in her sky. Their peaceful existence was a fragile thing, a bubble of warmth in a vast, frozen wilderness. Couldn't last. One evening, as a blizzard raged outside, shaking the very foundations of the old house, Silas heard it. A sound that didn't belong to the storm. It was a low, mechanical hum, growing steadily louder, cutting through the wind's howl. He went to the window, peering out into the white chaos. His blood ran cold. Hovering just beyond the tree line was a sleek, black craft, its surface matte and non-reflective, shaped like a predatory insect. It was a hunter-killer drone, a relic of the war that had chased Lyra and her children across the galaxy. Its single red sensor eye swept the landscape searching. Lyra appeared at his side, her face pale even for her violet skin. "They found us," she whispered, her voice tight with dread. "The Vraks." She explained in halting words that the Vraks were a merciless faction, scavengers who hunted survivors for sport or for their valuable biosignatures. They wouldn't take prisoners. Silas's mind raced. His cabin was a fortress of wood and stone, but it was no match for advanced alien weaponry. He looked at Lyra, then at the terrified faces of Kalen and Mira. He was just a man with an axe and a hunting rifle, but he was their only chance. "Get the children into the root cellar," he said, his voice calm despite the hammering of his heart. "Barricade the door from the inside. Don't make a sound." He grabbed his rifle, an old, reliable bolt-action passed down from his grandfather, and a heavy iron poker from the fireplace. He knew it was a fool's errand, a final stand against an impossible foe, but as he stepped out into the blinding snow, he felt a strange sense of clarity. This was his home and these were his guests. He wouldn't let them be taken. The drone descended slowly, its hum now a menacing growl. It scanned him, a beam of red light playing over his body. From a speaker on its underside, a synthesized, guttural voice crackled through the storm. "Surrender the fugitives. Your primitive resistance is futile." Silas didn't answer. He raised his rifle and fired. The bullet sparked harmlessly off the drone's hull. It responded instantly, a searing blue energy bolt lancing out from its underbelly. Silas dove behind a snow-covered woodpile as the bolt vaporized the spot where he'd been standing. The heat from the blast was intense, melting the snow in an instant. He was outmatched, outgunned, and running out of time. He needed a plan, and he needed it fast. He remembered the old bear trap he kept in the shed, a massive, rusted thing designed to hold a grizzly. It was a long shot, but it was all he had. He sprinted for the shed, the drone's energy bolts tearing up the ground at his heels, the snow hissing and steaming where they struck. Inside the shed, he hefted the heavy trap, his muscles screaming in protest. He dragged it out into the open, right in the drone's path, and set the trigger with frantic speed. He then ran perpendicular to its line of sight, waving his arms and shouting, drawing its attention away from the trap. The drone, focused on its primary target, pivoted to follow him. It hovered lower, preparing for a final, killing shot. Silas held his breath, his back pressed against the icy trunk of a pine tree. The drone drifted forward, its sensor eye fixed on him, oblivious to the ancient steel jaws waiting beneath its landing struts. There was a loud, metallic snap, followed by a shower of sparks. The drone lurched violently, one of its struts caught in the bear trap's unforgiving grip. It struggled, its engines whining in protest, but the old trap held firm, its rusted teeth biting deep into the alien metal. Silas didn't hesitate. He charged forward, the iron poker raised high. He slammed it into the drone sensor eye with all his strength. There was a shower of sparks, a final agonized screech from the machine, and then it went dark, its hum dying into the storm's relentless howl. Silas stood there, panting, covered in snow and soot, his hands raw and bleeding. He had won. He had protected his home. When he returned to the cabin, Lyra was waiting for him at the door, her children peeking out from behind her legs. She took in his battered state, the singed edges of his coat, the wild look in his eyes. Without a word, she pulled him inside, her hands moving with urgent care. She helped him out of his wet clothes, fetched warm water, and tended to his minor burns with a salve from her own meager supplies. Her touch was gentle, her focus absolute. As she worked, her earlier terror was replaced by a new emotion, a dawning awe, a profound respect that shone in her luminous eyes. She had seen him face down a monster from her nightmares with nothing but courage and ingenuity, and he had won. He wasn't just a kind man, he was a warrior. Later that night, after the twins were asleep, they sat by the fire. The storm had lessened, and a pale moon cast long shadows across the room. Lyra spoke, her voice softer than he'd ever heard it. She told him about her world, a planet of towering crystal forests and violet seas, now gone. She told him about her husband, a brave pilot who had died buying them time to escape. She spoke of her fear, her grief, and her overwhelming gratitude. "You are my family now, Silas Thorne," she said, the words simple but carrying the weight of a sacred vow. "You saved us. You gave us a home." She reached across the space between them and took his hand in hers, her cool skin a perfect counterpoint to his own warmth. In that quiet, firelit room, surrounded by the sleeping forms of her children, Silas felt a connection form, deep and undeniable. His solitary life was over, not with a whimper, but with a defiant roar against the storm. He had found something he never knew he was missing. A purpose, a family, and a love as vast and mysterious as the stars themselves. The old wooden house was no longer just a shelter from the cold. It was a sanctuary, a promise, and the beginning of a future he could never have imagined. Outside, the snow continued to fall, blanketing the world in white. But inside, a new, warm light had been kindled, one that would guide them through whatever darkness lay ahead. The peace they'd forged in the cabin was a fragile bloom in a field of ice, and it was not long before the first frost of a new threat began to creep in. Lyra's gratitude was genuine, her affection for Silas growing with every shared meal and quiet evening by the fire. Yet, there was a shadow in her eyes he couldn't quite place, a tension that tightened her shoulders when she thought he wasn't looking, a habit of scanning the horizon long after the Vrax drone had been reduced to scrap metal. One morning, while Silas was mending a fishing net, he found her at the small workbench he'd set up near the window. She was carefully disassembling a piece of the drone's wreckage, her long fingers moving with an unnerving precision. From its core, she extracted a small, crystalline data chip, its surface pulsing with a faint, internal light. She saw him watching and quickly closed her fist around it, a flicker of something. Guilt? Fear? Crossing her face before she forced a calm expression. "Just making sure it's truly dead," she said, her voice a little too steady. Silas nodded, accepting her explanation, but the seed of doubt had been planted. That night he pretended to sleep, his senses on high alert. He heard the soft rustle of her blanket, the almost silent tread of her bare feet on the wooden floor. He watched through slitted eyes as she crept to the far corner of the room, away from the sleeping twins. She held the crystal chip in her palm, and as she whispered words in her own guttural tongue, the chip projected a shimmering, three-dimensional star map onto the wall. It was a map of a sector of space he didn't recognize, centered on a single bright point that pulsed with an ominous rhythm. He saw her trace a route on the map with a trembling finger, her expression one of profound sorrow and grim determination. The truth began to dawn on him then, cold and sharp. Lyra was not just a refugee widow. She was a fugitive with a mission. The next day, he confronted her gently, not with accusation, but with concern. "Lyra," he began, his voice low so as not to wake the children. "What is that map for?" Her violet skin seemed to pale, and she looked away, her white hair falling like a curtain over her face. For a long moment she was silent, wrestling with a decision. Finally, she turned back to him, her eyes filled with tears that glittered like diamonds. "My husband did not just die in a battle," she confessed, her voice breaking. "He was the captain of the royal guard for our empress. Our world fell because of a traitor, a high-ranking general named Forlag, who sold our defenses to the Vraks. My husband stole the evidence, the data chip you saw, and we fled. But Forlag's agents are everywhere. They don't just want us dead. They want that chip." She explained that the bright point on the map was a hidden sanctuary, a neutral space station where she could deliver the evidence and expose Forlag's treachery, potentially rallying the scattered remnants of her people. Her journey to this frozen world had been a desperate detour, a last gamble to keep her children alive long enough to complete her mission. She had never intended to stay. Silas felt a complex storm of emotions, betrayal that she'd kept this from him, admiration for her courage, and a deep, aching fear for her safety. "You were going to leave," he stated, the words heavy in the quiet room. She nodded, unable to meet his gaze. "I had to, for my people, for their future." In that moment, their fragile new family stood on a precipice. He could let her go, honor her duty, and return to his solitary life. Or he could try to stop her, to keep her and the children safe here in their snowy sanctuary. But before he could decide, fate intervened with brutal swiftness. A second, far more powerful hum shattered the morning calm, deeper and more resonant than the drones. This was no scout. This was a ship. Silas rushed to the window and his heart sank. A sleek, gunmetal gray vessel, bearing the insignia of a coiled serpent, the mark of General Forlag himself, was descending through the clouds, its landing struts unfolding like the legs of a spider. They had been found. Forlag hadn't sent minions. He had come for the chip himself. Panic threatened to overwhelm them, but Lyra's warrior spirit snapped into focus. "The cellar won't hold against them," she said, her voice now hard and commanding, the voice of a captain's wife. "We have to run." To the old trapper's cave in the northern ridge. It was a 2-day trek through the most treacherous part of the mountains, a place Silas himself had only visited once. It was their only chance. They gathered what they could in frantic silence: food, blankets, Silas's rifle, and Lyra's spear. As they prepared to flee out the back door, Kaelin began to cry, overwhelmed by the terror of leaving their new home. Mira, trying to be brave, clutched her brother's hand, her small face pale with fear. Silas looked at them, then at Lyra, and made his choice. He would not let her face this alone. He would not let his family be torn apart. "We go together," he said, his voice firm. "And we finish this." Their flight through the snow was a nightmare of exhaustion and fear. The wind cut like knives, and the snowdrifts threatened to swallow them whole. Behind them, they could see the lights of Forlag's ship sweeping the landscape, searching. On the second day, just as they reached the mouth of the narrow canyon that led to the cave, they were spotted. A squad of Forlag's elite soldiers, clad in black armor that seemed to drink the light, emerged from the blizzard, their energy rifles trained on the small group. Their leader, a hulking figure with a scarred, reptilian face, stepped forward. "Give us the child, widow," he hissed, his voice like grinding stone. "The boy carries the genetic key to our empress's bloodline. He is the true heir, not some traitor's brat." The final, devastating twist crashed over Silas. Kaelin wasn't just Lyra's son. He was the lost prince of her people, the last hope for their restoration. Lyra had been protecting not just a secret, but a king, trapped between the soldiers and the sheer cliff face. With her children at her back, Lyra's defiance blazed. She raised her spear, her violet skin seeming to glow with an inner fire. Silas stood beside her, his old rifle feeling woefully inadequate, but his resolve unshaken. He was no longer just a woodsman defending his home. He was the guardian of a queen, a prince, and a future. As the soldiers advanced, their weapons humming to life, Silas and Lyra prepared to make their final stand in the frozen heart of an alien winter. Their love and their duty now inextricably bound in a fight for survival that would echo across the stars. The old wooden house was far behind them, but the family forged within its walls was ready to face the galaxy itself. The alien commander's words hung in the frigid air, a revelation that changed everything. Kalen, the quiet, wide-eyed boy who loved Silas's stories, was the heir to a lost throne. Lyra's secret wasn't just about evidence. It was about the very future of her people. The soldiers advanced, their black armor gleaming dully in the weak winter sun, their energy rifles humming with lethal power. There was no time for fear, only for action. Silas knew the mountains better than anyone. He saw their one advantage. The narrow canyon entrance was a bottleneck, and above them, the snow-laden cornice of the ridge was unstable. He met Lyra's eyes, and in a single glance, they communicated a desperate plan. "Get the children behind that rock," he hissed, pointing to a large boulder that offered some cover. "Keep them down." As Lyra ushered Mira and Kalen to safety, Silas did the last thing the soldiers expected. He didn't raise his rifle. Instead, he charged directly at them. A wild, roaring figure from an old Earth legend, his iron poker held high. His sudden, suicidal charge caused a moment of hesitation, a split second of confusion among the disciplined ranks. In that instant, Lyra moved. She was not just a mother. She was a warrior of the Royal Guard. She vaulted onto the canyon wall, using handholds invisible to the human eye, and flung her spear with impossible force. It struck the lead soldier's rifle, shattering its power cell in a shower of sparks and disabling it. The distraction was all Silas needed. He didn't aim for the soldiers, he aimed for the mountain itself. He slammed the heavy iron poker into a specific, weak point in the ice wall he'd noted on his previous journey, a point where the snowpack was precariously balanced. The impact was a sharp crack that echoed like a gunshot. For a terrifying second, nothing happened. Then, with a groan that seemed to come from the planet's core, the entire cornice above the soldiers gave way. A massive avalanche of snow and ice roared down upon them, swallowing their shouts of alarm and burying them under tons of frozen death. Silence returned to the canyon, broken only by the twins' soft crying and the frantic beating of Silas's heart. He stumbled back to Lyra and the children, his body trembling with adrenaline and exhaustion. They were safe for now, but the larger ship, Forlag's command vessel, still hung in the sky like a vulture. They had won a battle, not the war. Their only hope was the Trapper's Cave. Inside its deep, winding tunnels, they found not just shelter, but a forgotten relic. An old, non-functional emergency beacon left behind by a long-dead prospector. Silas, with his practical knowledge of mechanics, and Lyra, with her understanding of alien energy systems, worked together through the night. They cannibalized parts from the Vrax drone's wreckage and used the cave's natural geothermal heat to power the ancient device. As dawn broke, they sent out a single, powerful distress signal. Not to any human authority, but on a frequency Lyra knew was monitored by the loyalist remnants of her own fleet. 2 days later, the sky filled with ships. Not the sleek, predatory vessels of the Vrax, but the proud, angular cruisers of Lyra's people, their hulls bearing the crest of the royal house. They had received her message. They had come for their queen and their prince. On the deck of the flagship, General Forlag was brought before them in chains, his treachery exposed by the data chip and his own failed pursuit. Justice was swift and final. In the aftermath, Lyra stood on the observation deck, looking down at the small, snowy world that had saved her family. Silas stood beside her, his hand in hers, the rough skin of a human woodsman against the smooth, violet skin of an alien queen. She turned to him, her white hair catching the light of a distant sun, her eyes filled with a love that had been forged in fire and ice. "You gave us more than shelter, Silas Thorne," she said, her voice clear and strong. "You gave us our future. You are not just a guardian. You are my king." Before him, before her people, she knelt, not in submission, but in a formal proposal of marriage, a union of two worlds. The crew of the ship, humans and aliens alike, cheered. They returned to her restored world, a planet slowly healing from its wounds. Silas, the man from the old wooden house, became a legend, a human who had changed the destiny of an empire. He never sought power, only a home and a family. And he found both, in a palace of crystal and light, with a purple-skinned queen who loved him, and 2 children who called him father. Their story, born in a blizzard and sealed in starlight, became a testament to the idea that the most profound bonds can be formed in the unlikeliest of places, proving that empathy and love for one's children, however different they may look, is indeed the light that can guide a way into a new future. The wedding was a ceremony that united 2 worlds. on the restored capital planet of Lyra's people, beneath a sky filled with twin moons, the palace gardens bloomed with flowers that shimmered in colors unseen on Earth. Silas, dressed not in royal finery but in a simple, well-made tunic of deep blue that complemented Lyra's violet skin, stood at the center of it all. He felt a profound sense of peace, a feeling that this was where he was always meant to be. Lyra was radiant. Her white hair was woven with strands of starlight and living crystal, and her gown seemed to be spun from the very nebulae of her home system. She held his hands, her large, luminous eyes fixed on his, and repeated the ancient vows of her people, her voice strong and clear for all to hear. My life, my heart, my world. I give them to you, Silas Thorne, my king, my protector, my love. The crowd of her loyal subjects, a sea of violet and green and blue skins, roared their approval, their cheers echoing through the crystalline spires of the city. Their life together was a beautiful blend of their two worlds. They built a home within the palace that was a sanctuary of warmth and familiarity, a room with a large stone fireplace, wooden beams, and a view of a tranquil lake that reminded Silas of his old cabin. It was their private retreat, a place where they could be just a husband and wife, a mother and father. Kaelin, the young prince, grew into a wise and just leader, his human guardian's lessons in humility and compassion shaping his rule. Mira, with her quick mind and fierce spirit, became a brilliant scientist, bridging the technological gap between their species. Silas never sought the throne for himself, but his influence was felt in every corner of the kingdom. He taught them the value of the land, of patience, of building something that lasts. He showed them how to find joy in the simple things, the warmth of a fire, the taste of a shared meal, the sound of children's laughter. Years turned into decades, and their love only deepened. They had more children, a new generation that was a perfect, beautiful fusion of human and alien heritage, with skin the color of twilight and hair like spun silver. Their family was large, loud, and full of love, a testament to the impossible bond that had begun in a lonely, snowy house on a forgotten world. Silas, the man who had once believed solitude was his only companion, found his greatest happiness in the heart of his family, proving that a true home is not a place, but the people you love. And they lived, not just happily, but with a profound and enduring joy that became a legend for all time. The wedding was a union of two worlds beneath twin moons. Silas stood in simple blue, his heart full, his past a quiet memory. Lyra, radiant in starlight-woven hair and nebula-spun gown, held his hands. I give you my life, my heart, my world, she vowed before her people. Cheers rose from the violet, green, and blue-skinned crowd in the palace gardens. Their home within the palace held a stone fireplace and wooden beams. A window looked out on a tranquil lake, echoing his old cabin's peace. Here they were not king and queen but husband, wife, mother, father. Kaelin grew wise and just, shaped by Silas's lessons in humility. Myra's brilliant mind bridged human and alien science with grace. Silas never claimed the throne, yet his influence was everywhere. He taught them to honor the land, to value patience, to build to last. He showed them joy in shared meals, crackling fires, and children's laughter. Years flowed like a gentle river, deepening their bond with every season. Their love became the quiet foundation of a healing world. From their union came more children, twilight skin, silver hair, bright eyes. A new generation, a living bridge between stars and soil, hope and history. Evenings were spent in their warm room, stories told, hands entwined. Lyra would rest her head on his shoulder, whispering thanks for his courage. Silas would smile, thinking of the blizzard that brought him his family. He who once cherished silence now cherished the chaos of loving voices. His solitude had been a shell. Their love cracked it open into light. On clear nights, they'd walk the palace gardens, pointing out Earth's distant star. He'd tell the twins' children tales of a snowy wooden house and a second chance. They'd listen wide-eyed, knowing their grandfather was a hero of two worlds. Peace reigned, not just in the kingdom, but in their hearts. No more running, no more fear, only the steady rhythm of shared days. Their marriage was a promise kept, a sanctuary built on trust and sacrifice. In each other's arms, they found a home no war could ever destroy. Their legacy wasn't power, but compassion, kindness, and unwavering loyalty. They aged together, their hair, his gray, hers still white as snow, mingling in the wind. Grandchildren played at their feet, their laughter echoing through crystal halls. When the time came, They left this world hand in hand, souls intertwined. But their story lived on, a beacon for all who believed in unlikely love. For in a frozen wilderness, a lonely man opened his door and found a universe. He gave shelter, and in return, received a family, a purpose, and eternal joy. Their happy ending wasn't an end at all, but a beginning that echoed through time. And in every child's laugh, in every act of kindness, Silas and Lyra lived on.